Hello, Paige, and hello to everybody out there. Good evening and welcome. My name's Melanie, and I am the Programs Librarian here at Hornsby Library. It's really nice to have you all with us. I know that we have lots of people here with us who are from overseas, so that's exciting for us. It's the first time we've done an author talk with an international audience, so welcome to you all. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm currently on the traditional lands of the Darug and Gurungai people, and I recognise their continuing connection to land, culture, community and story. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Tonight we're here to speak with Paige Toon to celebrate her wonderful new novel, The Minute I Saw You. Before we begin, I just want to let you all know that we'll have time for questions at the end of the talk, and we'd love you to share your questions with us. On your screen there's a Q&A button and you can type your questions per page in there at any time during the talk. Paige Toon grew up between England, Australia and America, and I'm going to have a guess that this has something to do with all of the amazing locations we get to enjoy when we read her novels. She's written 14 novels, a series for young adults and a collection of short stories. Tonight she's here to share with us the stories behind The Minute I Saw You, a wonderful new novel that kicks off with the exciting rush that comes with that instant attraction that we sometimes feel to somebody. But really it goes on to explore the challenges that we can face when trying to turn that attraction into a relationship. Paige is joining us all the way from the UK, and I could not be more happy to introduce her to you all. Welcome, Paige.
Hello, how are you all? Thank you very much for tuning in. I know it's quite early here in the UK. Well, I think it's early, 9:30 in the morning. We're in like lockdown sort of lions at the moment, you know, just trying to get up in time to start homeschooling is a challenge in itself. So it is very nice to hear from you all. Very nice to know that some of you have, come from the UK to tune in this early, and lovely to hear that there are some Australians there as well, because obviously, this is where I grew up in Australia. Yeah, shall I just kick off my talk now, Melanie?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you very much for the intro. Yeah, so I grew up in Australia. My dad was a racing driver, and so I had a bit of an unusual upbringing, which definitely does sort of come into play when I'm thinking of my stories. I've got a few pics actually. I'm gonna like straight away go over and share my screen. This is the first time I've done like a Zoom thing where I'm sharing my screen, so I've tidied up my this. And in fact, my screensaver is a picture in Cornwall, which is where we went where I went to. I've read a couple of books over there. The last piece of my heart, and also 5 years from now. So this is when I was down there doing a little bit of research for 5 years from now. So I'm just going to have a look here and click on my upbringing pics, and open these up, and hopefully this is working. Okay, right. So this is the house that I grew up in the Adelaide Hills. And when I wrote my first book, Lucy in the Sky, I really wanted to set the book in Adelaide, and in the hills. I just sort of I really wanted to sort of base it around places that I knew, and, have it feeling really, really close to me. Anyway, I ended up not doing that. I remember my brother saying to me, he said, for your first book, you should make it more recognisable to sort of international readers, and Adelaide Hills is a little bit obscure for people from all around the world. So, he encouraged me to set it in Sydney. And I wasn't very familiar with Sydney, but I'll come to that. So I grew up between Australia, which is where I went to school, and we spent some time in America. And it was basically because my dad was a racing driver, and we used to travel around the world, depending on where he was racing at the time. So I was actually born in England, and just happened to be, where I was at the time, when my brother and I were both born in England. So we're very lucky we've got dual nationality, so we can live in Australia and England, and, sort of flip between the two if we want to. Basically, I only went to school in Australia. So until I was about 13 years old, I did 6 months of school in Australia, and the rest of the time I was doing tutoring, either in England or America, depending on where we were. There's Dad, and that's us at Le Mans, I think it was. That's my brother there on the right, and my dad. So I just thought I'd like to show you those few little pictures there, and I'm going to close those down again. You have to bear with me. Now, screen sharing, stop share. There we go. So here I am again. Yeah, so we used to sort of like travel around a lot. And you know, I grew up. I spent quite a lot of my formative years sort of growing up in halfway in America and half in Australia. And then when Dad set up his own racing team and started sort of running that from the UK, we eventually moved to the UK permanently. And you know, I ended up going properly to school and stuff like that. You know, in time to do all my GCSEs, which are kind of like the big, you know, the first sort of big exams you do over here. So yeah, it was a strange, very strange childhood, you know, having 6 months of the year somewhere and 6 months of the year somewhere else. And I loved it. You know, my brother and I used to get really excited about, you know, getting on that plane and, you know, packing all of our teddies and, you know, trying to squeeze a few more into my dad's suitcase. Dad would always manage to find like space for just a few more teddies, you know, which I'd want to sort of take across to the other side of the world and hang out with, you know. But yeah, very, very sort of unusual. And, you know, when I came to sort of start writing my books, you know, I really wanted to set them in lots of different lovely locations, and was definitely inspired by the travel I did in, you know, in my sort of formative years. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the minute I saw you, and then I'll come back to some research and stuff that I did for this and also for my other books. And no, in fact, sorry, before I get to that, let me also just tell you, you know, in terms of my upbringing and you know, my first novel, like basically ever since I was a little girl, I used to write stories. And you know, the first job I ever wanted to do was to become an author. And you know, I'd sort of think to myself, like, it would be really nice to, you know, eventually maybe write for a magazine first. You know, I used to get Dolly magazine sent to me, and when we would go to the UK, you know, and I thought it would be really nice to, you know, to maybe go and work for a magazine first. You know, I started getting really into that, and then eventually, you know, when I decide to have kids, then I'll start, you know, writing books. But yeah, that's sort of, it's actually looking back, you know, you have these big dreams as a kid when you're sort of growing up, you know, but the reality of making that happen, you know, could have been quite difficult. I was incredibly lucky. Like I remember taking a year out after university and coming back over to Australia, and I made a film when I was over there. I went to work. I remember sort of thinking, you know, right, I don't want to waitress again. You know, I'd done that when I was 18. I found it really, really hard. And I thought, you know, I really don't want to do that again. I really don't want to be a telemarketer. You know, I sort of heard of people who'd like, you know, gone over to Australia and had to do some telemarketing and stuff. And I was just like, no, you know, I really don't want to do that. Anyway, the only jobs I could get, you know, were telemarketing or waitressing. And so I took this job at this place called, oh God, I can't remember what, some sort of holiday sort of place. It was timeshare basically. And so you had to sort of ring up people and, you know, and sort of try to ask them sort of three questions to, you know, work out whether or not they've, you know, got enough money in their, you know, in their banks to be able to potentially invest in timeshare, and then invite them in for this, you know, for the salespeople to take them around. And it was such a funny environment. You know, there were all these, you know, behind the scenes, there were all these sort of telemarketers who were all so different. There were like serial telemarketers, you know, this sort of 60-year-old woman who'd like telemarketed her whole life. I was a rural people person, you know, that was all she did. And, you know, like the sort of really hardworking people and, you know, young students, and just such a mix. And I thought this would make a brilliant film. Like this would just be, you know, and I kind of like came up with the title, A Few Minutes of Your Time, and teamed up with a couple of, you know, the other telemarketers to basically make like a documentary about behind the scenes. And anyway, I ended up putting so much time into this, and you know, the editing process of it. You know, I really got into sort of all of the editing, and I'd kind of gone away from the idea of working for a magazine. You know, I'd sort of, when I was at university and in my late teens, I was very much into writing music and, you know, played the piano, wrote songs and stuff, and was thinking more along those lines. But when I started doing this, I remember my husband saying to me, he said, you know, you would be like a good editor, you know, I can see you. So I was like, oh, that's what I always wanted to do, was work for a magazine. So when I got back from Australia, I went and did work experience. I just contacted some magazines to try and do work experience. And I went for the smaller magazines. If anyone's thinking of, you know, thinking of doing this or using this as a way of getting in, don't go for the big ones. Like I ended up working for Heat magazine, which was one of the biggest magazines of its, you know, back in its heyday. It was selling like 600,000 copies a week, and was just absolutely huge. And but you know, the workies, that's what you call them, the workies who'd come in would only ever get to stay for a week, because we were over, you know, there were so many of them, and you can't make a good impression in such a short amount of time. So I went for a small magazine and was only supposed to be there for a week, and at the end of the week I was like, please, can I stay another week? I'll clean out your entire video cabinet, and you know, and get it all nice and tidy. And they're like, oh yeah, sure, okay. So I stayed there another week. And then the editorial assistant, who was like the secretary of, of the magazine, so the most junior person in the hierarchy, she said to me, at the end of that week, well, I'm going away in a couple of weeks. Do you want to cover me for holiday? I'm like, yes. And so after my month in total, I went to the editor and I said, please, please think of me if anything comes up, and gave him my, CV. And a couple of months later, I got a phone call from another editor who working for a teen magazine, and she invited me in for an interview, and I got the job. So I went to work at Big Magazine, which was this sort of celebrity title, and it was really fun. We'd have, like bands coming in, boy bands coming into the office. I remember Westlife, sort of seeing them. You used to go to like showcases and things, and you'd like see. And like I interviewed Jake Gyllenhaal when he was only a little, young boy. So he was like, he might have been 16 or so, but he seemed quite young to me. And used to get to interview different people, and it was a really fun job. And from there, I moved on to Heat. Which I very quickly became reviews editor at Heat because my boss left. I went there as a reviews assistant, and then she left, and I ended up just doing her job after 5 months, and suddenly was reviews editor. And at the point that I joined Heat, it was actually on the verge of closing. I found this out later, but it was selling like 30,000 copies a week or something. And over the course of that year, Big Brother happened, Posh Spice suddenly became this big thing, and we started selling more and more copies. And, like I say, it was a massive sort of rise in the sort of 6 or 7 years that I worked there. It went from selling 30,000 to 600,000 a week. And so I was in a really, really good position, really well placed for contacts and getting to know people. And so I started coming back to my dream of writing this book. And at this point in my life, my parents and my brother had moved back to Australia. And I'd met the man that I was going to marry at university, and had this great job, and we weren't leaving England anytime soon. And I felt very, very torn, especially with my family all moved back, they've all gone back to Australia. And so I had this idea for this book that was about this girl sort of torn between two countries and two men, as it turns out. And that was Lucy in the Sky. So a little copy of Lucy in the Sky. And I don't know, am I backwards?
No, it's good.
Oh, you can see it the right way, good. So Lucy, it says, is the grass really greener on the other side of the world? But I had this idea for this girl who gets on a plane to go on a 24-hour flight to Australia, and right at the very beginning, she gets a text message from her boyfriend's mobile saying, I've slept with your boyfriend 4 times this month. And then she has to switch off her phone and has this horrible sort of flight down to Australia. And when she's down there, she doesn't really trust him, she doesn't really know whether or not he's been cheating on her. There are warning signs about him, and anyway, she has this attraction with this hot young surfer dude, who sort of seems to have no prospects, is going to be on the other side of the world once she goes back. But anyway, I had this idea. And during my time at Heat, I would see so many books coming in, all these sort of, I'd be choosing which ones to review, and it was an amazing job to be behind the scenes sort of doing all of that. But the more books I would see come in, the more I would sort of start to doubt that I would ever become an author myself, and I think it was, I had this idea, but I was like, how on earth would I fill that little idea, that concept out into 100,000 words? I hadn't sort of planned out the whole book. On a very long delay when I was over in Indianapolis, went over there to see some friends and go to a wedding, and on a really long delay, like it was 24 hours, I think we were stuck there in America, I started writing the beginning of the book, and I only got like maybe a page or 2 in, like it was a while. But one day I went for lunch with a friend. I met lots of publicists who wanted to have their books featured in Heat, over the time that I worked there. But there were a couple of publicists in particular who I'd become friends with, and they were, just completely down to earth people who, would say, well, this doesn't really, this isn't very Heat, this book, but she's lovely, if you can squeeze her into the chart, I'd really appreciate it. And so, I would do that, and we were sort of, we became good friends. Anyway, Nigel Stoneman, his name is, and he worked for Simon & Schuster. And he said to me, when we were out at lunch one day, he said, you should write a book, love, you're like working at Heat, you'd get a book deal, And I said, well, I do have an idea. And so I told him this idea for Lucy in the Sky, which didn't even have a title yet. Lucy's original name was going to be Meg, just because I like the name. And he said, I love it. I'm going to go back and tell my publisher. And so 5 minutes after I got back from the office, with my heart absolutely hammering, I couldn't believe I'd actually sort of told someone, this idea. someone who might even be able to help. And he said, she loves it, she wants to meet you. And so a week later, I had this sort of breakfast date booked in to see Suzanne Babineau, who was like one of the top dogs at Simon and Schuster. And that weekend, I wrote, like, I was frenzied. I was so excited, like I texted my brother the idea, and he came back with all these name titles, one of which was Lucy in the Sky. I'm like, yeah, I love that name. I'm gonna like switch out Meg's name for Lucy. I wrote 3 chapters of the book, and I wrote a 5,000 word synopsis. And so when Suzanne asked if I'd written anything, I could show her these things. And based on that, and obviously, it definitely 100% helped that I worked at Heat, within 2 days, I was offered a 2-book deal. And Nigel also said to me, he said, I'd tell her you can write it by Christmas and have it out next April. And so this was mid-September, and I had a full-time job. I'd never written a book before, but for some reason I said this, and she was like, well, we wouldn't normally work to those tight deadlines, but we did, And I wrote that book like in every lunch break, before work, after work, every weekend. And I ended up writing it in 2.5 months. I had 3.5, and I wrote it in 2.5. And during that time, we also I went down to Australia to see my family. It was my mum's 60th birthday. And so she and I flew over to Sydney together. And I'm going to share the screen again and just sort of show you like a couple of pics of mum and me. And so let me see, hopefully this will open. Yeah, there we go. This is like 14 or so years ago. Nice jeans. My mum came with me, and and it was so nice to kind of like travel around and see the places that Lucy and her friends were going to live in. We went to this ice bar. Like I remember walking past this window and down on Wharf, Canary Wharf. No, not Canary. The big wharf. I can't remember what it's called. Right in Sydney Harbour, and looking up and saying, "What's that?" Could like see people wearing fur coats, inside this window. And it was an ice bar. I was like, "Oh, let's go in there," and I'll write a scene in the ice bar, for this book. And look, my mum is still helping me with my research now. That's us. That's us in Grantchester, outside the Blue Ball Inn, which is partly where this book is set. So I'll stop this share again now. But yeah, so I was very lucky, Lucy in the Sky, I wrote it, and, it came out. I did set it in Sydney. 4 years later, I decided to write that book set in the Adelaide Hills, and that was Pictures of Lily. So my 4th book, is set in the Adelaide Hills, and, that's all around where I grew up. And, it's one of the books that's the most, sort of special to me, because it's, so much of it sort of touches on places in my childhood. And then I haven't really done that since the minute I saw you, because this book's set around Cambridge, which is where I live now. And the first time I came to Cambridge, I absolutely loved it. My son was a baby, and we did a punting tour, and I was just blown away by this beautiful city, and this incredible sort of the river that runs along what they call the backs, and there are all these incredible old, in fact, let me show you. I'm going to share the screen again. Here we go. I can just show you some pictures of Cambridge. Right, Research Pics Cam. Here we go. No, it's these ones I want to show you. Here we go. I did tidy up my desktop before I allowed any of you to see it. Right, here we go. So this is Cambridge, and this is like one of the punting stations. And this was only taken a couple of weeks ago. That's me, and we were canoeing down the Cam in lockdown. It's like normally this place is rammed full of all those punts there, and so many more. Those must all be in, like, loads are in storage. Are usually like down this little small stretch of river, and it's so busy. And so it was practically deserted. There were just a few kayakers around, but you can see like these sort of beautiful old buildings. And this is a shot that was taken before lockdown. And King's College, it's just that it doesn't look anywhere near as big as it actually is in real life. Like, it's massive, this massive sort of thing. But I wrote about Cambridge in One Perfect Summer, which was my 6th book. I don't know. I know I'm small right now, but there you go. One Perfect Summer is my 6th book, and yeah, I wrote about Cambridge then, and it was really magical. Sort of, I'll just leave that there. Really magical, doing researching the city that had suddenly become my home. Because every time you research something, like Sydney to me still feels a little bit like home, because I went to Manly, and sort of really kind of could picture Lucy living there with Nathan. And you know, and so every time I sort of do any research, you know, you feel like a little part of you belongs in that place, or a little part of that place belongs to you. You know, it's sort of always, I always carry it with me, and if I ever go back to the same place, I just have this real, you know, uplifting feeling of being there. And so I felt like that with Cambridge, but this time I got to stay. Like, we moved to Cambridge at the point that I started writing about it and researching it. And that's the Bridge of Sighs. You know, there's a section in The Minute I Saw You, which refers to the Bridge of Sighs. You know, and they say they're about to play the staring game, and they pull up underneath the Bridge of Sighs. Well, they talk about pulling up underneath it, but they can't. So I have to sort of go a little bit further. It's King's College Chapel. You might recognise it as the place that, you know, they do King's College. They do the Christmas a Christmas concert from King's, you know, which I think is broadcast around the world. So there you go. That's my Cambridge ones. I'll just close this down again. That sort of gives you an idea of what Cambridge looks like. So yeah, I did a lot of research for One Perfect Summer, and then many years later decided to write about Cambridge again for The Minute I Saw You. I should have saved this book for next year, because I can't go anywhere right now. I can't go to research anything, so that would have made a bit more sense. I could have just like driven around and seen it all. But yeah, in fact, next year's book, I am setting, you know, in a place that I'm really familiar with, the Yorkshire Dales. So, you know, I'm okay. It's all good. Don't worry. Would you actually some more research pics? I'm going to share the screen again, and we'll have a look at these research pics. Because over to life, if I can go to the places that I'm writing about. Here we go. Hold on. Turny. Right. Let me just see if I can open all of these together. Yeah. After Lucy in the Sky, like, it felt so, you know, so sort of special being able to go places. So I was 3 months pregnant at this point. I basically delivered Lucy in the Sky and promptly fell pregnant, and then had to go to LA to research Johnny Be Good. But it was fun. Like, you'll recognize this pod. There's this section in Johnny which takes place in the Standard downtown, which is a hotel, and it's got this rooftop bar with a swimming pool, and they've got these massive red pods which are, you know, have got water beds in them, and there's a whole scene sort of set around there. So I did in that pod myself. And like the south of France, Baby Be Mine. This is the beginning of One Perfect Summer is set here, you know, at Dancing Ledge, which is just in Dorset, which is absolutely stunning. This is in Miami. Went there for Key West. Went there for the longest holiday research. This is Chamonix, and when I climbed to the well, I didn't climb. God, no, I did not climb to the top of this mountain. I caught a cable car up to this mountain, but I was terrified. Like, it was so scary to be at the top, and that was for the one we fell in love with. And, you know, I try to do loads of research for, you know, the different books that I write. You know, but there's, you know, this one's about three sisters, it's about triplets, and that was probably the hardest one to research, because I had to really understand three different characters, and one of them, Phoebe, was into rock climbing and, you know, all sorts, and just could not be further from what I would want to do. So you know, I had to go to the top of this cable car, and I was terrified. It was so high, you know, like there was this massive sort of like drop, you know, off the side of this bridge, and I was just, my heart was hammering, you know, and the kids were like running around. They were quite young at the time, and I'm just like, come back here, you know. But 2 years later, going back to Chamonix just on holiday, after having written about it and having sort of been inside Phoebe's head, it was like a breath of fresh air, you know. I mean, it was a breath of fresh air, but being up there at the top of the mountain again was just beautiful. And sometimes, you know, I go to places like Thailand. We went there on a lovely family holiday with my family, my parents, and, you know, and it was so lovely. I had to write about it. I didn't go there for research, but, you know, I incorporated it into the last piece of my heart, um, which is also set in, it's mainly in Cornwall, but they go to Thailand at the end. And in fact, we've sort of done more of a Thai inspired cover, but it should really be more Cornwall, to be honest. But that's another one. And then, yeah, this one is my desktop screensaver, just because I love it. But, you know, the colours are so vibrant. This is also this is 5 years from now land. The point where Nell and Van sort of have their first kiss. This is Kynance Cove, you know, and they're basically, I think I'm sort of maybe standing in front of the big rock that they stand on when they have their first kiss, you know, and it's just absolutely one of my favourite beaches in the world. Like, it's just so stunning. It's like, you know, you can't believe it's England. Like, it just sort of felt so gorgeous. And then I went to Rome and Norway for my last one. And that was for If You Could Go Anywhere, this would be a good book to read in lockdown, because this is about two people who love traveling, one of whom has spent her first 27 years in Cuba Pedy. She's Australian, and it's this desert mining town, and she's looked after her grandmother for the last 10 years and hasn't been able to leave, and she was already all set to sort of spread her wings and go fly and see the world when her grandmother fell ill, and so she stays there for a very long time. And I'd like to sort of touch base. If there was any book I was going to touch base with, it would be If You Could Go Anywhere, and see how Angie and Alessandro are getting on in lockdown. So there we go. Am I back? Yes, I think I am. So anyway, the minute I saw you, I'm good at rambling, aren't I? And I will ramble quite quickly from this point onwards, because my son's doing a drum lesson in like 25 minutes, and we don't want to be listening to that. So the minute I saw you is about Hannah and Sonny. And Hannah works as a dispensing optician, and so she spends her working life staring into the eyes of complete strangers. And one day she sees this hot guy out on the street who's talking on his phone, and she's like, "Oh, look at him," And he comes into the shop, and straight away, when as soon as they're having to get quite close, there's a little bit of there's an attraction. So I can do a short reading, if you'd like. Okay, so this is just when they're already into into doing the eye test. Right, his eyes are so blue, azure blue I'd call them, thus startling against his dark lashes. "Have a seat and pop your chin on the rest," I say when he's ready. After taking pictures of the back of each eye, we switch to a second machine so I can do a quick reading of his prescription. "Have you worked here long?" he asks. "Only a few weeks." "What happened to Mr. Grumpy?" He's leaning back in his chair, smirking and gently swivelling from left to right. "If you're talking about Bernard, and I wouldn't like to presume, then he's moved up to Scotland to be closer to his ailing parents." He grins. "Can't say old Mrs. Halitosis." "You haven't got up close and personal with me yet?" No. Those words did not just leave my lips. Except from the look on his face, it appears that they did. His eyes have widened, not to mention his grin. I did not mean that the way it sounded. He laughs with delight, and despite my embarrassment, the sound makes me feel jittery. "One last test," I say through gritted teeth. I'm just going to skip forward a few pages so you don't need to hear all that. You can read it. They're now back at her desk. He's chosen some glasses, and this is when they have to get a bit closer. "Can I check the fit?" "Sure." He leans closer to me across the narrow desk space. He smells amazing. There's the slightest trace of abrasion under my thumbs as they rest on his cheeks and give the frames a wiggle. The corner of his mouth tilts up, but he hastily presses his lips together, trying to suppress a smile. I bite my lip, trying to straighten my own face. His humour is having a contagious effect. "Sorry," he apologises. "It's okay," I murmur, running my fingers along the length of the glasses to make sure they're long enough to sit properly on his ears. Once again, his lips twitch. Sorry, he mutters adorably as we full-on grin at each other. Lots of people get the giggles, I reassure him as I complete my checks. "I didn't get the giggles with Bernard," he comments dryly, and a thrill darts through me. Right, now I need to take some measurements. I pick up a marker pen. "Look at me again." He stares straight into my eyes as I mark the spot where the centre of his pupil aligns with the lenses. I'm far more aware than usual of this particular client's close proximity, but I'm focused on the task. "You have very unusual eyes," he says in a low voice as I finish with the second eye. "Do I?" I reel back slightly as I reply, but in truth I know I do. They're a strange, almost golden colour, flecked and circled with green. "Yeah, you do." His gaze is unwavering. I raise one eyebrow at him. "You can take them off now." So there's basically, this sort of like kind of chemistry with them when they're really sort of up close, staring into each other's eyes. And then Hannah's someone who doesn't do long-term relationships. So she sort of, when she discovers that he actually lives in Amsterdam and that he's a photographer, she decides that he'd be perfect for just one night of kind of passion. She doesn't want anything more than that. And so when he comes back in 2 weeks later, the night before he's due to fly back to Amsterdam, she's thinking, let's see what happens now. Anyway, he is a complete shadow of his former self. This man he looks broken. He can't meet her eyes. He's very downcast, and she's like, what the hell's happened to him? And so it's a very sort of strange meeting, going from all this flirty banter to someone who's deeply unsettled and disturbed. And over time, obviously, she sees him a couple of chapters later, sees him coming out of the next door neighbour's at the clinic, she knows that he's in therapy. So he's going to therapy. Something has happened. He's trying to get himself right. Over time, they bump into each other a couple more times. Don't want to spoil it too much, but they do become friends. And he admits that he can't do lasting relationships either, but the way that he's going to combat it is by swearing himself off sex for 6 months, and in order to sort of form lasting relationships without the sex. And so it was such a delicious book to write, to be able to write this sort of chemistry between them, while also at the same time it's very dark. In fact, this is my lightest and my darkest book, I would say, in one. On the one hand, it was so joyful being able to write about this kind of flirty banter and the chemistry between them. But on the other, the reason they are the way they are, the reasons for them are quite dark. And even as I was writing the book, I didn't know how dark they were going to be. Like Hannah's story, I knew 100%. The whole idea for the book came from the idea of Hannah's backstory. Sunny's story kind of unveiled itself to me as I went along. I think I kind of deep down did know what had happened to him, but I didn't want to sort of face it until we get back to that point. So, but I think the fact that they keep kind of keeping it light and sort of coming back to it makes it a really joyful, escapist read. As well as being something a little less fluffy than your average kind of beach read. I'm going to show you just a couple more pictures. And then I will probably throw this open to questions. So let's just have a little look here. A few little pictures. This book also takes you to Amsterdam, when she goes off to visit Sunny. Well, she goes off to visit a friend, and he takes her. I've just got one picture there, but I took plenty more when I was there. And again, Amsterdam, I went there to see Catfish and the Bottlemen in concert, and it's like one of my favourite places to go and see bands, because you get this smaller venue with really big bands that come. So I went over there with some friends for a weekend just to go and do that, and decided, right, I want to write about Amsterdam, so included it in the book. This is the Blue Ball Inn, which is one of the pubs that features quite heavily in The Minute I Saw You. And the lovely thing about this book was being able to write about places and things that I do myself. Like I love going on Grantchester pub crawls with my friends. There are 4 pubs really, really close to each other in Grantchester, so you can kind of just go from one to the next, and with only having to walk about 100 metres. So this one here is my favourite, and it's got a gorgeous little beer garden in the back, which I write about in the book. I'll put some of these pictures. In fact, I have put some of them up on Instagram at Paige Toon Author, if anyone wants to sort of see any more research pics. This is the Orchard, which is this amazing tea garden, which used to be frequented by people like Virginia Woolf and Rupert Brooke. And it's just this sprawling, much, much bigger than what it looks like here. This sprawling sort of garden set under the apple trees. It's been there for, decades and decades. And I went there with Mum and Dad to do some proper research, and obviously had a cup of tea and a cream tea while I was there. And this is me on canoe in front of King's College Chapel. And this is it down in Australia. Aussies might recognise it. There's a point where in the story where she goes down to the river, to the Murray River. Her parents live on a houseboat, and I actually went on a houseboat with my family last Easter, and so decided I wanted to somehow incorporate that into the story too. And these were just these incredible kind of yellow cliffs that stretched along this section of the Murray. So it was absolutely lovely. And I think that's it for me. So I'm gonna maybe open it back. Am I back to my... Yeah, good.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paige. That was wonderful. And we've got some audience questions, so we're going to get into them. But if I can be cheeky, I'm going to ask the first one. I was been thinking a lot, that like we're all going through this pandemic, and it's interesting because all the art we're seeing at the moment, the books and the films and things that are coming out, were all made before this happened. And, we've been wondering, I guess, how authors and filmmakers and so on are going to incorporate this into their work. Do you think that it will make a difference to the books that you're writing from now on?
I'm not sure it will too much. Like the book that I'm writing, the book that I'm going to write next, it's basically told between then when they were teenagers and now when they're in their early 30s. And because this book won't come out until next year, the virus will have been something that hopefully is a bit more contained by that point. So I'm sure, I'll have to mention it in some way, but it won't, because of the timeline, it's half of the book will be set sort of, when they're teenagers. And that's a book about, just in case anyone's interested, about a girl called Leah whose parents are foster carers, and so she spends her childhood living in a house with other troubled teenagers, and one guy in particular, she sort of has quite a close bond with, and there's another character who is like the son of a sort of wealthy local landowner, and he's been away at boarding school, and for some reason he's come back to go to the local state school, and he's he also is quite troubled, has, looks on paper like he should have it all, but very much doesn't. So it's sort of about the three of them told between, the past and the future. And yeah, probably won't give away too much more other than that.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah,
something for...
I'm sure I'll mention it. Like I say, I'd like to write a short story, about Angie and Alessandro in lockdown because, they're so used to traveling. They go around and the idea, but they live in Italy and, on the land. So it'd just, yeah, be nice to touch base. I've been thinking about what they would be doing right now, and I'd quite like to, yeah, probably just having lots of sex.
Well, I don't think anybody would complain about that.
Not with Alessandro.
So I'm going to open up the questions, but while I do it, to everybody out there who's watching, we were having a bit of a chat before we started that, we're all new to doing online talks and it's a challenge for us to work with, but we have the option when we do them of setting them up like we have been tonight, where you get to be at home in your pajamas, eating breakfast or having dinner, depending on where you are, and it's nice and private for you. But of course, you also can be seen on the screen. And I guess we're interested to know what your preference is. So if you want to pop something into the Q&A, because that helps us decide when we're setting up future events. But let's get into our questions.
Because I would have liked to have been able to see your faces. Like it would have been so nice if I could actually sit here and chat to, the people who are listening to me. I can see Melanie, which is really nice. She's nodding along and, being interested, as I've gone along, which has been really lovely. But I sort of thought when I heard this was going to be on Zoom that I'd get to see, like however many faces are kind of there, and that would be really nice to actually be able to talk to readers. But equally understand if you would rather just be off screen and not have, not have to sort of come into my living room with me. So yeah, it would be good to know.
Yeah, let us know what you think. Okay, now my first question is from Shannon. Hello, Shannon. She says that you use a lot of music and artist connections in all of your books. So where do you find your musical influences for the books? Because they always fit so well with the mood.
Oh, thank you. Shannon, actually, I know Shannon. Well, I don't know her personally, but we've talked on social media and she told me she was tuning in. So I'm assuming it's Shannon, the Shannon that I'm talking about. She does like Spotify playlists and stuff with my books.
Oh, nice.
We'll kind of like incorporate songs that have been mentioned in the books and yeah, which is just incredible. I actually can just click into her Spotify playlist and be reminded of the books. Yeah, it's just whoever I'm listening to at the time, I try and incorporate, I try and sort of, explore and listen to more music, and often, there'll be like, if you like this artist, you'll like this one, and I'll find music that way, or I might see like a song on a film. I watched Call Me by Your Name, that film. I saw it, I don't know, a couple of years ago or a year ago or whenever it came out, and really liked it. But then I watched it towards the end of the writing for this one, and my family had gone away. It was like, I usually have like a weekend towards the end of my deadline when my husband would take the kids up north to go and visit grandparents. And I'll just have Friday through Sunday evening, just be able to just focus on the writing. And that's when I'll do, easily sort of do 20,000 words in that weekend. So I'll write like a fifth of the book effectively, just in one weekend. And I remember watching that movie when I was in this process of, of writing, and, found it really emotional. Like I was really sobbing, found it so much sadder the second time around than I did the first time, about this sort of relationship that wasn't going to come to fruition. And sorry, I've just spoiled it for you. But they play a couple of songs in the film, and I started listening to these songs quite a lot. And, and so those were the songs I was listening to, like the Mysteries of Love and Visions of Gideon, when I was writing the end of the book, and often those are the songs that kind of set the tone for, for the whole book. Like 5 years from now, This Town by Kygo, was a song that just used to make me cry and cry. For Lucy in the Sky, it was The Killers when we were young, and I can't hear that song now without thinking of Lucy and Nathan, that song more than any others, like sums up the book. Or Sex on Fire by Kings and Leon, that's Johnny Be Good for me, So there's always a song. Shivers by Cal Lavelle, that one, and Mickey Echo, Pull Me Down. Those two songs are the longest holiday for me, So I should do like a post really and just tell everyone all these songs that, kind of make me think of the book, because I think it might be quite fun to listen to as you're reading.
Oh, I think people would love that. Okay, our next question is from Kira, and she's asking, what's your process for writing? Do you plan chapter by chapter, or do you write and just hope it comes together?
I don't plan chapter by chapter, but I've been thinking about the book. Even though I write my books, I still write them, in sort of around 3 months. I don't really kind of get into starting writing until September, and they're always... Sorry, 10 minutes time for my son's drum lesson. We've got the alarm coming up too. We will know when this session is over because we will hear the drum bashing through the ceiling. Yeah, no, I definitely, it's not a chapter by chapter thing because I've been thinking about these books. I write them quickly, but I think about them for a good year. So they are having full-on conversations inside my head, becoming really well-rounded characters. And I'm doing the research the rest of the time too. So I'm getting to know, what makes them tick and, what might have sort of happened to them. I have to I do a lot of research for my books, really go into quite a lot of depth. Like I learned so much about rock climbing and barely sort of touched on it for Phoebe, but I wanted to understand what she knew, so even though I barely sort of mentioned any of these techniques and things that she could use, I learned so much about it because I needed to be able to be inside her head doing that. But on the whole, yeah, I have this idea. I've had to write like a synopsis for my publisher, so that helps me, kind of formulate the book, but that's about 3 pages long, and then I just sit down and write it and wing it. Basically, I just see what happens and the story unfolds and kind of, it'll take you on different turns you didn't necessarily see coming. So, but on the whole, the book is how I envisaged it from the beginning.
Fabulous. Now, I just want to do a quick message because I want us to go up until the last possible minute so I get to as many questions as we can. But I just know, of course, I have no doubt that most people who are here have already read lots of Paige's books and own them. But anything that you're planning to go out and buy, we always encourage you to go to your local independent bookseller, especially at the moment. Times are tough for people. So do what you can to support them. If you're local to us, our bookseller that we always work with for our events is Novella over at Wahroonga, and they take good care of us. We actually couldn't do our author talk program without them. So if they're local to you, have a think about supporting them. But, wherever you are, do it locally if you can. Now, our next question. So besides Heat magazine, which gave you some fabulous memories and opportunities, what's the best opportunity that writing has given you? This is from Deb in the UK.
Oh, hi, Deb. Oh, I mean, I think it's probably the research really. It's the stuff that I sort of choose to do for the book. Like I absolutely loved Norway, where we went a couple of years ago for If You Could Go Anywhere, and it's stepping out of your comfort zone, like doing stuff that I wouldn't have thought that I would normally do. Like or talking to people that I wouldn't have bothered to sort of try to talk to, or I would be sort of too shy or whatever, and I just you kind of you open yourself up a lot more, to outside experiences. And like, Norway, we went to this down the end of this fjord, and I knew it was a place where base jumpers took off. And then to go and try and find base jumpers and sort of try and talk to some of them to, to help me with the research and get this ride on this little dinghy, down the fjord and see these base jumpers jumping off a cliff, and they looked like they were teeny tiny. They were so far away, like 2,000 meters or whatever up, and maybe not as much as that, maybe it was 2,000 feet, but they were very, very high up, and seeing these guys just launching themselves off cliffs and things, while I was just down in this, on this one little piece of land surrounded by water, kind of watching them float down to the sky, down from the sky. So it's stuff like that, that's really interesting. I went for Chasing Daisy, even though my dad's a racing driver, and so I used to be able to go back, into the pits quite a lot, and I met Ayrton Senna, when I was younger, which was incredible at the Australian Grand Prix. It was in Adelaide, actually. And sort of getting to do things like that. But when I was writing Chasing Daisy, we managed to go and have a look at the McLaren Technology Centre, and sort of see behind the scenes of, where they make cars, and that sort of stuff is really fun. It definitely, I went behind the scenes at, like rock concerts and stuff like that, when I was writing Jessie and Johnny, and that was In Excess, I think, which was not with Michael Hutchence. That was sadly after his time, but yeah, fun stuff like that. You can do quite a lot, if you're sort of saying I'm writing this book and researching it. So I need to think of what's next on my bucket list.
Okay, our next question is from Liz, and she's asking, at what point do you come up with the title of your books? Is it before the story? And she's also wondering if you write in a structured way. So I guess she's wondering if you have a plan to how many hours you work a day or how many books you write a day.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Okay, so the second part of the question, I have to write when the kids are in school. You know, I used to write during baby nap time, so I would have to cram as many words as possible when my baby son was sleeping, you know, which might only be sort of an hour and a half or 2 hours a day, you know, and then I'd be mum again. But you know, that was a very intensive way of working, you know, but it did seem to work, you know. And now the kids are in school, you know, I have that time and manage to do other stuff during that time as well, like housework and social media. So, you know, it's quite structured. And what was the first part of the question again?
She was wondering when you come up with your titles.
Oh, the titles. If I come up with them at the beginning of a book, I am so thrilled, and that's happened like a handful of times. But so much of the time, it's you know, it's really late. In fact, Chasing Daisy, we didn't have a title. We were about to go to print, and we still didn't have a title we could all agree on. And you know, I think you know, someone had suggested "Love in the Fast Lane," which I hated. So again, I was like texting my brother. It's like, please, I need titles. You know, he's quite creative, you know. And so I was like, you know, and he came back with a list of titles, one of which was Chasing Daisy, you know. And I thought, okay. And literally, Daisy wasn't called Daisy; she was called Anna. And I could have find and replace on the entire book, but I really like the name Daisy, so it worked. But you know, it was very strange, kind of like reading it when it came back to me, you know, all typeset and everything, and sort of like, oh yeah, her name's Daisy, not Anna. You know? So titles are so important. But yeah, the minute I saw you, we were well into the writing of the book before we agreed on that. You know, like, but other times, One Perfect Summer, The Longest Holiday, 5 years from now was that, you know, the idea for the whole book came from words that my dad had said to me. You know, he said in 5 years' time, you know, you'll look back and will understand why this happened. I would messed up my A levels basically, but you know, his words were right, because if I hadn't messed up my A levels, I wouldn't have gone to a different university. I wouldn't have met my husband. I wouldn't have my two kids. You know, so I sort of think everything happens for a reason. You know, but you know that was going to be in 5 years' time, and we changed it to 5 years from now just because of the apostrophe.
Yes. Now, I don't think we're going to get to all of the questions, but I want to say to everybody who's put them in, thank you so much. And I see you all. Thank you for putting them in. Some of the questions are a little similar to some we've answered, so I'm going to try and go with ones that are a bit different. And I like this question from Maddie because it's about sex. So what she's saying is that yours is one of the first books she's read where sex is the main focus, but also in the same way it isn't, because there's so much sexual tension without, you know, necessarily a lot of actual sex. So how did that impact how you approach this book compared to your others?
Because they can't have sex in this one, can they? Well, see, that's what I loved about this, you know, because I love writing like a sort of forbidden love story, or, you know, an unrequited love story, you know, the way the tension sort of builds and builds and builds, you know. So to be able to write this one was just amazing, you know, because like, you know, and to be able to write the way their relationship builds, you know, and how they become friends and, you know, really come to really care about each other, you know, while still having this sort of sexual chemistry, you know, that they can't do anything about, you know. So yeah, I love this one, you know. I really loved that, you know, this sort of that side of it, you know. So yeah, you might see a bit more of that from me.
It was really something that I enjoyed very much about it. How are we going for time? How's the timer going?
We've got 2 minutes before the drums start playing.
Okay, let's try for one more. Okay, this is from somebody anonymous, so I'm not sure who's put it in, but they'd like to know if you've ever had a funny canoe moment.
No. Yeah. Well, my dad almost fell in when we were trying to launch it like a couple of summers ago. You know, he was like sort of very, very close to falling in. But it's funny, you know, because I write about you know, these four friends who go on the canoe quite a lot, and they have a dog. Hannah is looking after her uncle's dog, who's a black Labrador called Bertie, and Bertie is very much based on the character on a real dog called Berry. You know, a friend of the book that I've dedicated these friends to. Actually, you know, it's their dog really. But it's funny, you know, because now I've got a dog as well, and she's fast asleep over there on the mat. You know, probably won't appreciate me waking her up, but now we've got a little puppy, and we took her in the canoe, and I put a couple of photos of those on Instagram too. You know, so at some point she looked very much like she was going to topple in, just like Bertie does. But yeah, no, she stayed dry. I had a firm hold of her collar.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. I want to say, Paige, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. And I hope it's not very long before we can actually welcome you here in real life.
Oh, thank you. I would love that so much. I miss Australia. It's like, I don't know when I'm going to get there again. My parents were supposed to come over here literally just as lockdown happened and, they had to cancel their trip. So, yeah, and hopefully it won't be too long before we all catch up.
I know we're all missing each other so much, aren't we? And I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's tuning in from home. Thank you so much for being
Yeah,
with
thank you. Thank you so
us.
much from me.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope that we see you all at another one of our events really soon. So thank you and goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.